So it's mid-autumn and it's really time to reassess the last summer and how well it's gone. Bits of the garden that I loved, bits that I'd never repeat, bits that I hated. And there's a bit of the garden around here that I just want to talk through with you as I'm going through my own head about where to go from here. So kind of look. I've always been in two minds about this part of the garden anyway. I've never loved it. It's never quite worked out the way I hoped it would. I hate the design. I'm gonna say it was a complete fail. I've built this recess in the gravel here with the intention of putting a bench back in there, but I just don't want to do that. I don't like the depth of that recess. Everything about the shape of this drives me bananas. But the trouble is I can't kind of work out why. If I could work out why I didn't love it, then it would make me more confident with making the next move. But anyway, I know where I'm going. But so this is the planting as it currently is. I have had kids in the house that I've been responsible for 25 years, and I've never had money to spend on the garden. Nearly everything here has been propagated from friends' gardens, etc. So nothing's quite what I would have if I could have the perfect garden. But it is really interesting this time of year to stand here and think, well, what's worked and what hasn't? And Calamagrostis Carl Forster, the really vertical grass, there's absolutely no doubt is kind of star of the show. And the only challenge with that is keeping it in balance with everything else. It gets bigger and fatter every year, and so I'm having to trim it back all the time. That's okay. That's what you do with perennials. But that with the sedum, this is sedum matrona all the way through here, and I've got it echoing. There's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, at least a dozen clumps through there is really the next big key ingredient. It's such a workhorse. It's a plant that I admire rather than really love. It doesn't make my heart skip a beat, but golly, it's a good plant. And then there's things like the gaura here, the little white butterflies kind of hovering in amongst the sedum that's very much in its death throes, of course, because it's, that we've just had a couple of frosts, and this is what happens. It turns this horrible kind of mushy, gelatinous thing. It's disgusting, briefly. But when the sun is coming through it, it actually can look quite pretty. A little bit of Astaphricatii still doing its thing in there. But what's really curious, and I'm surprised at this year, is this kind of secondary flowering of the Ceanothus. Trying to remember the name of this one. Golly, I'll think of it. But it is that is one of the classic shrubs that I'm just going, look, it's admirable because it's drought tolerant, but at the same time, it takes up way too much space. I've got to be brutal with it all the time, and that can undermine its flowering. You've got to choose the time that you're cutting it back hard. The smokebush Cotinus Grace has been incredible this year. It's been actually incredible the last couple of years. I want to cut it really hard because I want big, long, vertical shoots. I don't want to see any branching at all on the shrub as I look at it. And I'm quite happy if I have to sacrifice flowers for that, and if all I get is big, long canes of foliage. But in this case, because we had some really beautiful late summer rains, it put on this second burst of growth and flowered. So it was a bonus. I got both those strong, unbranched canes as well as really late flowers. And every morning they are either frosted or heavy with dew, and the effect is incredible first thing in the morning. They're almost white. They look like they're made of icing. There's a few other shrubs in here that really require some rethinking too. Spirea cantoniensis at best can be fantastic, and it's bulletproof in the dry. But I've hardly had any flowers on it at all, and my intention was to have a whole lot of clipped domes of shrubs and then have that as big long cane sprays heavily in bloom. As it turns out, it bloomed so badly, I thought, well, it's going to become a ball as well. So I clipped it into a ball, which it needs reclipping now. But in every way, it's just wasting space. It's going to be gone. And likewise, this phlomis. This is Phlomis lysud, and it's a really good phlomis. But I just find in this kind of mixed planting, it's just dowdy and flat in kind of Mediterranean type gardening, and when it can be used repeatedly, mostly with things that are lower than it, around it, I really like it. But when it's subsumed in the growth of other things here, I don't know, it's just boring. And fun. I never know whether they're deadheaded or not. You kind of go, the deadheads are fun. No, they're not. They look just, they make the garden look like it's going senile too early in its life cycle. So that's going to go as well. But I finally worked out really what I've got here is a design problem. I'm trying to plant it as if it's broad scale perennial planting, when in fact what it is a relatively narrow border. There's about 4 to 5 meters between me and the barge boards of the veranda there. And in other parts it gets quite a lot deeper, but I really need to treat it more like a border than the broad scale planting that is going through my head. And I think that's where my mistake has been made. But I decided at one stage that we were so ravaged by drought, I was going to go all in the cultivarian, and the whole thing was going to be full of just clipped shrubs. Things like Viburnum tinus, the Elaeagnus, then eventually obviously the Spirea. I actually even thought that that's how I would treat the Ceanothus and clip that into a ball as well, so that all it was these really strongly clipped shapes. But then I go, no, shrubs are boring. I want a fair bit of seasonal change. So you can see the kind of indecision that goes on. I'd never be this indecisive if it was someone else's garden. I'd make a decision and stick with it. But with your own garden, you just want too much. And I can never decide which way to go. So I'm going to change everything here and going to pave just a small space, raise these beds. It's kind of too hard to explain just on camera what I'm heading towards, but it's something that is going to be able to be planted more as broad scale planting rather than the kind of border limitations that the current configuration puts on it. So I think this is the kind of reassessment that really we should all be doing on our gardens all the time. It's not about what's failed entirely. Some parts of your garden may have, but even the good bits can be better still. So let's be frank about it. That which could work harder for us to bring us more joy still.